Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us here this afternoon. My name is Brian Cheung. I am the economics reporter for Yahoo Finance based in New York. A fascinating discussion that we have ahead of us here this afternoon on youth aspirations in the Middle East and North Africa. And we're going to kick it off with a presentation, but I first just want to introduce our fantastic panelists that we have here this afternoon. And starting off with my left is Sahar Nasr. She is the Egyptian Minister of Investment and International Cooperation. We also have to her left, Jihad Azour. He is the director of the International Monetary Fund's Middle East Central Asia Department and formerly Lebanon's finance minister. And then to his left, we have Syrine Chaalala. She is the co-founder and managing director of the company nextProtein. And then to my right, last but certainly not least, is Sunil John. He is the president of Middle East and founder of ASDA'A BCW. And Sunil will actually be kicking off this conversation with giving us a lowdown on what the actual situation is in the Middle East and North Africa with a presentation. So with that, Sunil, I'll kick it off to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Brian. Brian's given me 10 minutes, but he said he'll give me a kind of bonus 2 minutes more.
I said I'd think about it, but
so we have that little bit of extra. But thank you very much for coming today, and I'm very pleased to be with you today. As the slide here says, you know, this is the 11th annual Arab Youth Survey. It was exactly 11 years ago when we looked at the region and found a very surprising obstacle, and that when we talk to our clients, whether in government or private sector, that there was no real data about the region's largest demographic, its youth. And that kind of inspired us to do something about it, to be able to go out and talk to these young men and women in this vast area that we call the Middle East and North Africa, and come out with those data and insights so it informs people in government, in private sector, in institutions, to make the right kind of policies. Because what we brought year on year was what these young people, the voice of these young people, you know, the understanding of the hearts and minds of these young people. And that's what we started 2008, and I can tell you very honestly, nobody took us seriously. Because in 2008, things were hunky-dory, and, you know, and then 8 and 9, and then came 10, when we found the finding. The top finding was the Arab youth want to live in a democracy. That was the top finding in 2010. So when you really looked at that data, you could actually see probably the Arab Spring about to happen. And that's the power of data, and that's the power of insight, and that's the power of listening to the voice of Arab youth, and that's what the survey does. I want to tell you the survey is done. I'm going to spend a little time on the methodology because, you know, methodology is important. Where is this data? Who does it? Who's behind this? It's done by PSB, our sister company, Pension Berlin, that's based here in the United States and operates across the world. It's a global custom research and analytics firm. And just so that if people don't know, ASDA'A BCW, or BCW, is a global public relations consultancy. We work across the world. We're part of WPP with $700 million in revenue and 4,000 consultants that operate across 5 continents. The Arab Youth Survey, when we started, we said we're going to do this. The survey is independent. It is financed by us through our own resources. We do not take any funds from anyone in the region, and that's why it's such a credible source and often quoted by global media from across the world. And as this report in 2019 says, you know, it's a call for reform. It's what the young people want, and I'll take you through some of the findings. And so over the years, this survey has been a platform for young people to voice their opinion and for people to actually refer to it. Just quickly, 2 slides on the methodology. I told you that this is the largest survey of its kind of the region's largest demographic. We do face-to-face interviews. This is not online research. The region is famous for unreliable data and insights that come from online research. So we go to all of these 15 countries across the Gulf, Levant, and North Africa, and talk to young people in the age group of 18 to 24, young people, 50% male, 50% female, And then we speak only to nationals in each country, so their insights are not skewed. 3,300 face-to-face was done in January of 2019. So what you see here is what these young people have said. We do public intercept because knocking on doors in the Middle East is not legal. In terms of methodology, again, we go through these 15 countries. We get a national sample, so we don't go just to capital cities. So, for example, Madam Minister, in Egypt, we go to Cairo, Alexandria, and Mansoura to ensure that we get a national sample. We also weigh the data to ensure that each country accounts for the same share in terms of the total sample. So, if there is a large populous country like Egypt, it would, if we had gone only by that sample, it would become the Egyptian Youth Survey. But we wanted to ensure, like in the United Nations, one country, one voice. So you see a very balanced sort of the findings. So we come out, we put the findings on ArabYouthSurvey.com. It's a public resource for anybody to refer to, for governments, and that's our contribution to the community in which we work and serve. What I've highlighted today are the top 3 findings. We have top 10 findings, and you can check that out. There's some important ones but for the theme of the IMF World Bank meetings here, we thought it's relevant to talk of 3 of them. The first one is about the role of government, and what do young people expect their governments to do for them? And here's the top finding. We go straight into it, Brian, I think, 5 minutes. And that's an important finding. As the region faces economic concerns, Arab youth feel entitled to government support. How did we come to that finding? Before we go to the real finding, here's something we ask every year, and that is, what do young people think as the biggest obstacles faced in the Middle East by them? And here's what you see, and we've given you tracking data, and that's the biggest benefit of the Arab Youth Survey, that you can track data, how these young people are thinking over the last 11 years. And you can see in the last 3 years, 17, 18, and 19, economic issues came to the fore, what we call kitchen table issues. And here's it, 56% said rising cost of living is the biggest obstacle faced by young people in this region. And the second, not surprisingly, unemployment. As most of you know, the Arab world has one of the highest rates of youth unemployment in the world, more than 30%. And I think this, in a way, is perceptions, but it, in a way, reflects what's the reality on the ground. And as you can see, there were rising concerns about security, about the rise of Daesh, as you can see from 12, 13, 14. But those issues have now gone into the background, and here are the issues of what I call kitchen table issues. But then when we ask them further, how strongly do you agree or disagree with the statement, my country is doing enough for young families? And here's the finding. 2 in 3 say their countries are not doing enough to help young families. And 65% agree with that statement. And when we nuance that finding into the 3 big regions, in the GCC, of course, there's much more trust in government. 39%, nearly 40% agree with that statement that, their government is not doing enough. But look at the dissatisfaction when you go down the line. North Africa, 74%, and the Levant, nearly 83% there. And then when we ask, again, further dive down into expectations about what young people want from their government, you can see here, the governments, when we ask, governments should be responsible for what? And we gave them a couple of key indicators here. Safety and security. 96% expect their governments to ensure safety and security. 89% education, and 88% healthcare. And that's kind of natural, We expect governments to do those 3 things. But when you go down the line, look at this. That's when things get very surprising. Energy subsidies, 78%. Jobs, 78%. Housing, 60%. And most surprisingly, 33% feel it is the government's responsibility to pay back their own personal debt. It's a great place to be. But then, can governments do that? And I'm sure Dr. Jihad and Dr. Sahar as well will have a lot to say on this matter. But that's what young people, so, they feel entitled. They want the governments to do anything. But that's good, high expectations. But can the government do it? Questions for policymakers to think about. High expectation is good. It's about a feeling of hope. But, by not meeting that, you could create a dangerous situation. We then focused on jobs, because that's the biggest concern. As you saw, the biggest obstacles of the Middle East region is cost of living and jobs. And here's what the Arab youth say. Arab youth across the region are increasingly concerned about unemployment. Let's look at the facts when we ask them the question. 89% across these 15 countries said they are concerned about unemployment. That's 9 out of 10 of the people that we talk to face said they are concerned. But when we dig a little deeper, you might find this very surprising. 96% in the Levant said they are concerned, 90% in North Africa, and surprisingly, 81% in the Gulf as well. In large populous countries like Saudi Arabia, you see a huge amount of unemployment, which the government, of course, is addressing. And that concern has risen dramatically from 2016 at 75% to nearly 90% today. That is the biggest problem, jobs. If anybody is running government or even the private sector, they have to focus on one thing, and that is to create jobs. We dug a little deeper and looked at data from across 15 countries, and look at it. Not surprisingly, the confidence in their national governments' ability to deal with unemployment, the confidence levels at one level, the United Arab Emirates, 97% of the young people we talked to, Emiratis in the UAE, said they're confident of their governments. Down the line, when you look at Iraq, 80% feel the governments can't deal with this huge problem of unemployment. And then when you look at it, Iraq 80%, Lebanon 70%, Palestine 68, Yemen 66, Morocco 65, Jordan 63. You can see all of these countries post-conflict or transitional nations. And that's where the concern is. By the confidence levels in the Gulf countries, UAE 97, Oman 90, Kuwait 87, and so on. Egyptian is well-balanced, Madam Minister. 50% is good, I think. Looking further down, where do they want these jobs? Is it in the government sector or in the private sector? And here's the surprising fact. When they look at future careers, what would you prefer? That was the question. 69% in the Gulf said they want government jobs. In North Africa, little less, but still surprisingly, 40%. Egypt falls in the North Africa sample. And in the Levant, slightly less, but almost 39%. But look at the question of private sector. 14% in the Gulf, 32% in North Africa, and another 37% in the Levant. Clearly, a little more propensity to go into private sector. But the most important data which we should address today is the spirit of entrepreneurialism, which is, do young people are ready to start a new business? Surprisingly low in 11% in the Gulf, 23% in North Africa, and about 15% in the Levant. And again, most of the Levant sample are very post-conflict countries and a lot of huge issues there. But that's the problem. What's the solution? As one of my clients said, talk of a problem, and the answer is education. Education, education. That's the real solution. We focused on that, and we asked young people, how do they feel about the education in their country? And here's the answer. Many young Arabs are unhappy with the education they receive in their countries. And when you really look at it in terms of data, 78% said they are concerned about the quality of education they receive in their country. And when you dig a little deeper, GCC 69% unhappy, North Africa 81%, and 84% in the Levant. And when we ask them, what are they unhappy about? The quality of universities, they are unhappy. 59%, oddly enough, said they are happy, they're satisfied with the quality, but 40% are not. Quality of teachers, 43% are not. Quality of schools, 45% are not happy. 49% are unhappy with the curriculum taught at schools. And another 49% feel that the education they receive in their own country does not prepare them for the jobs of the future. And that's the huge opportunity. The dividend of having a young demographic is to be able to convert them to move and take the huge opportunity of the jobs of the future. And young people feel that there is not enough done. So those were the three findings I wanted to bring, Brian, for us to discuss. So really, in terms of a recap, government role, huge amount, a sense of entitlement, huge expectation, huge challenge for the government. And governments are actually doing a hell of a lot to be able to meet that expectation. Jobs, I think that's a huge concern. We know the statistics. You know, the largest youth unemployment in the world is in the region. And of course, you know, the education is something that is critical to be able to change this situation. So in conclusion, we feel very privileged to be given the opportunity to come and present these findings here and to spark off this discussion. I would like to particularly thank Dr. Jihad Azour, who has actually given us a lot of input over the years to be able to make this a useful a piece of research that governments can use. And of course, my good friend Wafa Amar, who's helped us actually make sure that we are all come together on this. So thank you very much, Brian. Sorry if I overshot time.
Right on time.
I hope you found it interesting. Yeah.
Thank you, Sunil. Thank you. So we want to kick this off, and you were mentioning some of the statistics. Another statistic is that, you know, as you mentioned, the Middle East and North Africa having some of the highest youth unemployment. Actually, as of 2016, it was 24.6 in the MENA region. And you mentioned 90% are in this region concerned about being able to find a job. And this doesn't even include for or control for labor force participation, right? Unemployment accounts for those that are looking for jobs. It doesn't even include those who have given up on jobs, which is pretty substantial in this region as well. Before we get started on this conversation, because I do want to kick this off because we have a number of policymakers and macro thinkers, entrepreneurs on this panel, so we really have a multifaceted approach to this. I do want to say that we will have the opportunity for the audience to ask questions, so if you do want to think about something, kind of get that cooking in your head, and I'll let you know when you can step up to the mic and ask a question. But the first question I want to ask, directed towards the minister here. In Egypt, as we saw from Sunil's presentation, kind of a 50-50 split between those who have faith in the ability of the government to address high unemployment. How do you structure reform to address youth unemployment in your country, and how can that be expanded to the MENA region at large?
Thank you very much, Brian. Thank Jihad for having me on this panel. And I want to reflect here on something very, very important that is happening as we speak in the region. The region has been going through various uprisings, revolutions, a lot of unrest and grievances. And often after incidents such as that, young people have more aspirations and more hope for a better future, and that reforms would pay off very quickly, and that magically things would overnight would be great. They'll find the jobs, standard of living would be better, and they'd have excellent access to market. But reality is, following such challenging times, it's also very tough on the government, because this is where we resort to IMF programs, where we need to do major fiscal and monetary reforms to ensure a sound and stable macroeconomic framework, but also more important is security, and which is highlighted in the survey by the professor, that also, despite the fact that they have concerns regarding standard of living or income, which is basically inflation and unemployment, but again, many of the long list is all around security, safety, civil wars, and so forth. So here, the government is in a bit of a challenge situation. They know that for the medium term and the long term, they need to do major economic reforms that would have adverse implications on the population, especially low-income segments, and of course, in many cases, such as Egypt, the middle-income segments, and knowing that there's a demographic bulk, that means it impacts young people more, because that's the majority. 60% of the population in Egypt is youth. And here, the 50-50, going back to your question, Brian, is what have we been doing? So first, we had to move forward with an ambitious and bold economic reform program, major subsidy cuts, the flotation of the currency, which obviously had implication on some inflationary pressure because Egypt is a net importer of some of the basic needs. And hence we also had to do like a Marshall Plan where the government had to step in to create the first impetus for jobs, but we also simultaneously we moved with reforms that would improve the business environment to bring the private sector in, because we know that jobs would only be created through the private sector, and obviously with a lot of focus on SMEs and entrepreneurship startups. But as you can see from the survey, and that's where the 50% comes, is that young people tend to want to, again, despite that they want liberalization and reform, but at the end of the day, they prefer to get the government job. They see the government job still guaranteed and more assured and less risky, and because obviously private sector is so much performance based, so much like international institutions such as where we are today at the fund or at the bank, and hence we nevertheless we have to change culture, but we also have to invest in young people in terms of education, vocational training, capacity building, and that's why on startup it's incubators and accelerators. So it's not just providing financials, but also the capacity building and the training that would allow them to become entrepreneurs and to also be profitable, because you don't also want to let them down. So you have to provide a bit hands-on. So how can you make young people want to start their own business and willing to take a private sector job and not to rely on the government as a job creator, but as a regulator, as a reformer, and that's basically how we are currently operating. So financial inclusion has been one of our key reforms. I was just discussing with Dr. Jihad this issue. We've amended companies' law, investment law, but we've also amended the capital markets law, developed more non-bank financial institutions, because banks have a lot of requirements and prerequisites for you to get a loan, especially when you're just starting your business. So like having an ecosystem that is conducive for young people to create their own jobs.
So I want to expand on that point. I mean, that's a long list of things to pursue in terms of structural reform, but it seems like there's also a deeply cultural aspect to this as well. The statistics from Sunil showing that, I mean, there is a deeply rooted sense of entitlement for government support. And for Jihad, I'm interested to see from your vantage point at the IMF, how do you reshape youth aspirations? Because even with the minister's proposals for some of these structural changes, I mean, there is a wave of young people that are going to be advancing into prime age, working age, where the economy will need them, right? So how do you address the youth aspirational aspect, which might be more social, and how is that tied to the economic development in these countries?
Thank you. It's a tough question. When you have a population that is 60% of it is below 30, that has a level of unemployment above 30, where in the next 5 to 7 years you need 25 to 27 million new job opportunities, this issue becomes your primary concern. And even for us at the fund, it's impossible to think about macroeconomic stability and growth without tackling this issue. Because at the end of the day, achieving macroeconomic stability, improving growth, is to provide better living and job to those people. Therefore, this is something that is very important. Your question is how to provide them with opportunities. This is, I would look at it as the real question. Provide them with opportunities is and should be the high priority for all those who are intervening, not only government, not only international organizations, but also the other player in the room, which is the private sector. And for that, we need to do a paradigm shift from someone who feels that the future requires a protector, which is the state, to someone who feels that the future needs an enabler, who is the state. Therefore, in a world where technology is changing our life, changing our work environment, with a lot of uncertainties that are growing with the global tensions. You need to have a paradigm shift. And when we were together on the podium, when you launched your report, I said we need a new social contract. Because improving on the margin is not enough. I would say it has been tried. It led to growing the size of the state, but it did not answer the real issue. And this is where I think collectively we need to work. How? Productivity is low, we need to increase it. Access to finance in the region is surprisingly low compared to other parts of the world, both for SMEs and also for the population. We need to work on it. Also, understanding what is the role of social protection. Is it to provide more for those who already have, or provide for those who need to have the support of the state in order to be enabled to get into the decency of life and the decency of getting a good job? Therefore, those are the priorities. And those will translate into things ranging from achieving macroeconomic stability through the right fiscal policies, not to hijack the future of the youth by increasing the level of debt beyond what the state can afford, provide the right playing field to all of the players in order to find the right job, address the issue of the feeling of population that only WASTA can provide you opportunities, create a platform where education gives those people what they need in order to adjust to fast-moving world. Though this is, I would say, a simple equation, but it's very difficult to implement, especially that our region also are subjected to severe number of shocks. First shock is the discontent between state and citizen that is chronic and growing. The other one is we have a problem of instability that has been dragging and led to, I would say, a negative perception about investment opportunities in the region. And I'm sure that Sahar is fighting against that, but this is something that also is facing all of us. 3, we have the problem of refugees. That is not only a problem in terms of human, social, but also a problem of how you distribute a pie that is shrinking in countries who are receiving those refugees. And this is also a dimension that is very important. Add to this another important element, that we are in a world that is moving very fast. And a fast-moving world leads you or to embrace change or to become very much on the fear side. And I think this is what we are trying to do with our work on inclusive growth, is to say, let's work on the opportunities and let's work on making those opportunities not only aspirations, but realizations. And this is where our role as a fund becomes useful, is to provide through, in certain cases, programs, in other cases, some thoughts, analytical thought, like, for example, the work we're doing on job creation in the region or on social protection. Those are important pieces to contribute, to bring the debate to where the debate should be and unleash the energies of the private sector. And it's interesting because when you look at the youth, you have two youth in the Arab world. You have those who are already aspiring, like the lady on my left, and you have some who are fearing the future. And this is where I think we need to tilt it to the side of my young colleague here on the left side, and to create this energy.
So I'm wondering, let's take it to Syrine. I'm glad you were able to join us today because you can give us a Main Street view of what it's like to actually provide some of those opportunities, which Jihad just kind of laid out there as kind of being the core problem here. And you're offering a solution. You have a startup that you founded in 2015 that would make insect-based protein for animal feed to try to free up resources for human consumption. You are based in Paris and then also in Tunisia. When you're hiring on the ground there, what does it look like when you're interacting with those that are trying to get into the job market? What does the job market actually look like there? And what type of anecdotes do you think you can expand out to the larger MENA region in terms of what businesses can do to address this?
Thank you for that introduction. I have so much to say. I want to give you answers to some of the points that you brought up, but I'm going to try to stay focused. Just as a preface to creating our company, my business partner and I are both part of the Tunisian diaspora, who, after the Arab Spring, decided that we wanted to go back to Tunisia and to enable, to contribute to economic growth and create jobs, and that was part of our aspirations. So I left a very safe job at the United Nations, and my business partner, who had experience in the EU as an entrepreneur, also decided to close shop there, and we went back to Tunisia with this ambition to have an impact not only on our country, but also on a global scale. That's a very important point that I want to underline. So when we first got there, we, as an entrepreneur with an idea, the first thing that you need, obviously, is access to funding, because at an early stage, to develop your idea, to create your proof of concept, that's the first thing that you need. You need to have access to whether it be consultants, whether it be just people that are going to help you to write up a business plan, because that's your passport. That's what you need to use when you're looking for funding. You need a solid business plan. And obviously that entails a lot of information gathering. So when we first started out, months passed, and we quickly realized that in the region, it was extremely difficult to access, whether it be business angels or potential investors, especially when you're dealing with an innovative project, but also an early stage product. I want to say that it was impossible. And so we quickly gave up, because we still had this ambition, and we had to turn to Europe. And we were lucky enough to be able to do that, to go to Europe, to base our HQ in Europe, and look for funding there. And in Europe, there are a lot of mechanisms that promote innovations, that help you out with taux zéro, how do you say that in English?
Zero interest.
Zero interest loans, and so you have working spaces that you can access. But this is back in 2014, so things have changed since. And actually, we were talking a lot about reforms, and I want to underline that actually, because of this high rate of unemployment in the region, but also specifically in our country, the government has done something which is amazing and pioneering, whether it be in the region, but also on the continent of Africa, and that is developing the Startup Act law. And the Startup Act law is something that has changed the startup scene in Tunisia completely. First of all, it defined what a startup is, which is something that is completely different from, a regular company. A startup is extremely fast-paced. There's a lot of innovation in it. There's, it's young people wanting quick results and fast results, and already having that status is something that validates the idea and the ambition. Then through this reform, in Tunisia we have an issue with currency. We often our aspirations are very limited to the local market, and that's due to the currency. And through the Startup Act, now we're able to access foreign currency. We have, streamlined administrative processes that help us create our businesses. And today, in 2019, is when the law was actually officially set up, and we were part of the second generation who received this label. And we see tremendous change in the country, and an increase in startup creations. If I can just say one more point about the region. You know, today nextProtein is considered in the world part of the top 5 companies in terms of capacity and technological advancement in our sector. And we did this thanks to our 20-person team of technicians and engineers from Tunisia. So, you know, the quality of education, we were talking about it before, there is a high level of knowledge, but one issue that we have in Tunisia is the lack of investment in the scientific field. And even in the region, there's so much focus on logistics and IT, which are very important. But the agribusiness and biotechnology, those are also sectors of the future, and we have the capacities in our regions. And actually, I mean, just to give you an idea, we deal with insects. Our insects require a certain environment. We are the ideal region for insects. So we really, we have here an amazing opportunity to provide a sustainable solution to, you know, to what is currently being used for animal feed with the growing population, which is, you know, fish meal and soybean meal, which we know have very negative impacts on the planet. So, yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Syrine. I mean, I think this is really interesting. And by the way, I forgot to mention, keeping in the spirit of the youth, if you would like to tweet, you can join the conversation using hashtag IMFYouth. I should have said at the beginning. That's my fault. I want to bring this discussion back to Sunil, though. So, Sunil, Syrine was just touching on the idea of education, specifically on science as well, and you highlight in your survey that education could be the solution to this, but at the same time, as you mentioned, 78% of the respondents to the survey said they are concerned about the quality of education in the respective countries. How do you address that?
You know, I think for those who know the region well, I think education has been a very old problem, you know. I think there has been a big role of, you know, religious teaching in many schools, in school systems across the region. And, you know, the whole system of madrasa is now probably changing. But that's the kind of fixed mindset that most governments had, and those were the policies that were implemented. So you had an entire generation of people who focused on religion. And if you have the time, go see ArabYouthSurvey.com, and the number one finding we have this year is that young people feel that religion plays too much of a role in their lives, and they want religious institutions to be reformed. I'm not digressing, but it's an important point. You need to differentiate education systems with religious teaching, and you need to be able to equip these young people to be able to you know, use the opportunities that are coming up ahead. You know, you are actually, I mean, as Dr. Jihad said, it's all about creating opportunities for these young people. By not educating them, you are actually destroying an entire generation. When I said, you know, for any problem in the world, the solution is education, education, education. So that, I hope, explains that there has to be a dramatic change in how education is looked at by governments. That is the focus. I mean, it takes a generation to change that system. But if you don't start now, you're not going to see any effects. The impact of it will come in 20 years. But you have to start now. I mean, you know, yes, you can create funding. Yes, you can create bankruptcy laws. Yes, you can start the SMEs. But what about those young people? And the problem is even more complex is when you have these post-conflict states and you have a lot of these transition countries, you have had a generation of young people in their, you know, 10s and 15s and 20 years old who have had zero opportunity for education. Are these governments concerned about them? You talk, Dr. Jihad, of a refugee problem. It is massive. And these are people, young people in camps who have had zero education. What is this region going to face when they come into the job market with zero training? It's a big problem. I'm sorry, long answer, but that's...
So, I mean, we've hit on a lot of topics already so far: entrepreneurship, access to credit, the refugee crisis, education. But another thing, too, is the gender difference as well. So a statistic is that, on the whole, women are nearly 3 times less likely than men to seek work in a region that already has a very low labor force participation rate. So I want to see this question to the minister in terms of the structural or maybe cultural issues that kind of have led to that kind of disparity. how big of a piece of the puzzle is it to get women into the workforce as we address this issue, and how do you specifically target that to youth?
Yeah, definitely there is a gender issue in MENA region overall. It varies from one country to the other because also there is a bit of divergence in traditions and norms as actually the professor has divided the region into different components. I think that's important also to highlight. But in general, in terms of women, in terms of access, let's take the blocks that Jihad has highlighted. Access to finance, definitely women face a larger challenge. In fact, a survey that was conducted jointly between the IMF and the bank has shown that the banking system perceives women and entrepreneurs as more risky, despite the fact that their default rate is lower than that of men. So again, the perception here is an issue. So there is a gender dimension, and hence, as governments, we've been working very closely on that. First, through various programs that we have with the bank, with the EU, we're making sure that there is a specific percentage that would be targeted to women, and that hence provides capacity building and training to the banking system and the non-banks to always target women. So that's important. But we also need to also highlight that, interestingly, when you look deeper into the data issue, that you see women are mainly hired in government position or state-owned enterprises and not in the private sector. And this is also, again, because there is also a concern at the private sector level that they feel it is less risky and more guaranteed to hire men, even if they're at the same par in terms of quality of education and skills. And that probably links a bit with the maternity leave and other, and that's why institutions such as the bank and the IMF, they have parental leave. So hence, there is preference for women. And also, many of the labor law would say that there is a requirement to provide the services that it takes for a woman to be able to balance between her family responsibility and also her right to play an active role in the economic sphere. And hence, it is very important also to promote more nurseries and more services that would be able to allow women to play an active role in both. And here I want to stress the point that opportunities. I think what we are here after is providing women and men an equal opportunity. And it's not like a preference treatment or quota, but more an equal opportunity to play an active role. Young people need to have an equal opportunity to start their own business. Also, we need to ensure a level playing field, that there is more private sector participation in general in the economy in the Arab world. There has been a lot of concerns regarding less engagement of the private sector, and we know that the main job creators is private sector, and obviously SMEs. Because startups, we are working, the government has established Egypt Venture, we're working closely through various lines of credit and equity financing with a lot of incubators and accelerator, but with a population such as Egypt, 100 million, and with 60% youth, we need to go beyond the startup. We need to do also more large companies, medium-sized companies, because they will be creating a large bulk of the needed jobs.
So, Syrine, you're one of those startups, and as a female entrepreneur, you had the experience of trying to get credit in both Europe and in North Africa. Do you think that was a barrier for you, and how would you describe that experience?
You know, a few months ago, I won't name them, but a very prominent international organization came to visit our production site, and he looked at our staff, and he noticed that the majority of our team was female. And so he said, so is it because they live right close by, or? And my answer was simple. My answer was, no, we hired them because they were the most qualified. You know, as a young mother myself, you know, we were talking about issues in the region with being a woman, a mother. I mean, it's a problem all over the world. Let's agree to that. But I have to admit that in Tunisia, that is something that, you know, I found very difficult. You know, maternity leave, access to qualified services that can take care of my child. And actually, you know, because I was so affected by it, in my company, we actually actually are working on opening up like a nursery to help our female staff when that time comes in their lives. So just in general, I haven't, in Tunisia in particular, I haven't been faced with that many challenges because I'm a woman. I've faced many more challenges because my company is doing something that's never been done. It's an innovation. I've definitely faced those challenges. But because I'm a woman, no, it hasn't closed up any doors for me. And with whatever challenges that I did face, I tried to find a solution, and I did.
In fact, that's a very Tunisian example because I think women in Tunisia have had it very well with government policies and what has come out. So I think Syrine is an excellent example of that. Yeah.
So I want to direct one question to Jihad here, but before I do want to say that after this, we'll be taking some questions from the audience. So after that, just kind of get it in your head, and we'll delegate after that. But Jihad, on the education bit, is there a way to kind of fuse these two ideas together? The idea of education, also female participation. Is there a feeder within the education system that could more actively get the women in this region the skill set that they need to get these jobs? Is there kind of a cause and effect there?
We don't think that there is one solution that would have the shift of a problem like that. And in many of the policies that we work on, I take another example. When we worked on financial inclusion, we discovered that instruments are good, but are limited in their impact, and therefore you need to have a comprehensive approach. And the boundaries between macro and micro are becoming blurred. I give you an example. In our programs, we put conditions related to what Syrine is saying, that you need to create nurseries, you need to change the laws related to women participation. Therefore, even if the fund, who usually works on the macro, put part of the conditionalities which are perceived negatively, things like that, is to say that change has to operate at various levels. And you have to work at the extremely macro level. And in this case, if you don't reallocate resources at the budget level, and you keep very rigid budget system, stuck with a certain number of expenditures, it's impossible to achieve all these objectives, okay? And this is why the fund, for example, worked on how to quantify the MDGs and how to quantify them financially, because at the end of the day, they will remain aspirations if you don't translate this into the way you manage government. Therefore, addressing it at the macro level, and in this case, for example, we in the department, we're working on a paper on social spending, because this is how you can unlock resources. Second, education has to be related not only to put people in school, but to put people in the market. Access to talent is the priority. It's not only by providing teachers and building schools that you solve the problem. Therefore, you have to shift the paradigm. Education without jobs is exporting your most important resource, which is people. And therefore, you need also to look at that. This is what I think we need in the region to look at issues differently. We need to work together. We need to accept that issues are connected to an extent that in our macro work, we need to look at these issues. And in the micro work, people need to understand that there are macro constraints. And this is something that requires shift in the mentalities. This is to start with. At the family level, I think in many countries, we have here Tunisia or Egypt or Lebanon, my country, families spend a lot in education their kids. And they are spending more. And why they're spending more? Because public schools are not providing what they used to provide as a way to narrow the gaps between social groups. Everybody or a lot of people used to go to public school 20 or 30 or 40 years ago. Now we see less. And if we keep not reforming the way the state is functioning, we will see less people going to the public school, and we will see more teachers hired in the public schools. Therefore, we need to accept that reforms are for the good of people. And this is one of the issues that we face, we at the fund, because we are sometimes not well understood by people. They think that only we look at how we reduce budget deficit. No, we want to allocate resources to where the resources are more productive. That is not good. Mm-hmm. And having the state growing in size, not being more efficient, is not good. Mm-hmm. And this is something that we have. I hope that Sunil and others would help us, and Syrine, how we can convince people in the region that it's not working this way, and not by increasing spending, by being more in the patronage business, that we are building the right future.
Madam Minister, did you want to add something?
Yes, I actually want to build on what Jihad had just said. It's freeing scarce public resources, and that would only happen through major fiscal and monetary reforms, ensuring a sound macroeconomic framework. What we've done in Egypt, and maybe that's an opportunity to thank the IMF for an excellent program that we had, and of course, we managed to implement such a tough program because we've done it in consultation with the people, with the parliamentarians, and with the young people too. So I think because we were very much aware of the adverse implication. But here, freeing scarce public resources meant that the resources that were initially allocated to subsidizing electricity and petroleum for high income bracket families is now directed free to invest more into human capital, into education, into health care, and also into capacity building and training of young people, because education and early childhood education will pay off after a decade, right? But meanwhile, we need to address the issue of unemployment and to create jobs. And hence, in the medium term, you need to provide a lot of training and capacity building and linking here and give the private sector the lead, because there is a mismatch definitely in the labor market. So you want to make sure that the young people have the required skills to get the job that they dream of, not any job, because they're not only looking for any job, they're looking for a quality job. And here it's very important to also, even with the vocational training, this is where the private sector, and this is what Egypt is doing. So we're trying to make sure through the corporate social responsibility, main article in the investment law, that we ask the private sector to do the training, to establish centers of excellence, so that people get the job today and not wait for future generations.
All right. Well, let's open it up for questions. There's a microphone right in the middle of the row here. So let's take one from the first row over here. And if you could just state your name and also your affiliation.
Yeah, my name is Marcus Freitas. I'm from Brazil, but I live in China now. And it's kind of funny because I was looking for the statistics that I could say the same thing would be applicable in many countries around the world, particularly mine too. Sure. Now, my question to you is related to two things. In one of the things that you showed, many people want to have stable jobs and work in the governments. Now, that shows me that youth wants stability. Now, one thing that we see, for instance, in China is that one of the reasons why people save is because the government does have this 5-year strategy, 10-year strategy. So somehow the population understands that there is a long-term perspective. Now, I am sure that the challenge we face now in many places is that the youth doesn't have a long-term perspective because they don't know where the countries are going. So should we start thinking about, providing this understanding that a long-term perspective from government and in politics is an essential element for the countries, for the youth to know about the future? That's my first question. And the second one is this thing, is that whenever we talk about education, we never focus on the educators. And the reason we do see all these problems is that people are not getting updated. We don't talk about the educators and how to fix the challenges that they are facing. For instance, they are not preparing the workforce, the youth, for the challenges of labor that we now have in the markets. So how do we ensure that these guys, the educators, stay motivated so that they can better deliver things? Because if we have problems with the educator, the whole system will crumble and we'll be just throwing money away? So those are my two questions. Thank you.
Who wants to take that? We'll try to keep it short, too. We want to squeeze in one more question. No, it's okay.
I mean, since you referred to data that's there, I think young people want stability. Who doesn't want it? And we're talking of 18 to 24-year-olds who've seen conflict all through their life in their young age. But I think long-term perspective of government is the right thing, you know, when young people want to get on with life. Because young people anywhere in the world, as you said, whether it's Brazil, China, or the Middle East, want to look for stable futures. And that's what they want governments to do, to provide long-term perspectives of where life is going for themselves. So I think that is critical. And among the many things we talked about, education, you know, you're talking about investing today so you can reap the benefits decades down the line. That's long-term policy. You know, Japan did it after the World War II, and look at that economy today, but they had a long-term policy. Most of the governments in the region lack it, because they are about sticking with power. And in fact, one of the most important things that I would like to highlight is what Dr. Jihad said, which is, can we have a level playing field? Can we get the private sector to be more active? The truth of the matter, the facts on the ground, is that governments dominate that sector. There is not enough space for private sector to come. Even those private sectors who are there live on patronage. So if there is no long-term perspective of actually getting these private sectors to actually provide the real benefit of jobs and education, you need governments to have policies that matter. As the minister said, governments is a facilitator, is a provider of ensuring that the regulation helps these changes to happen. So you hit the nail on the head, sir. Long-term perspective is what's going to change. There are endemic problems, complex problems that can't be solved in 1 year, 2 years, 10. You need a 10-year, 20-year perspective. And on education, I can't agree with you more. The focus on teachers is so lacking, and I think, teachers are what change the world. They create people that can have the perspective to change the world, and that still needs to be done, really.
Let me quickly shed the light on two additional dimensions. People need stability sometimes because they are not able to cope with the acceleration of change. And therefore, you need to help them and enable them to be agile through education and training to be able to cope with change. And also there is another pattern. People seek stability because they feel that opportunities are not available for them. And I would like to stress on that. Opportunities are felt by the youth are limited to very few. When you correlate those statistics with other surveys, or this survey with other surveys, are showing that the youth in the Arab world believe that only through who you know you will get access to the jobs or to the opportunities. Therefore, I think also this is another important dimension that needs to reform the labor market. And back here, there are certain important reforms that people may not see that are important. If we reform well the labor market and we provide equal access through knowledge to opportunities, if we have the state not being pro-cyclical, and there is another pro-cyclicality, which is not with the evolution of the economy, is with the evolution of the social pressure. We see many of the government, and I think we can draw a very nice correlation, increasing spending after popular discontent, which is the wrong moment to increase spending. You need to pause, see what is the root cause, behind this tension, and then work on addressing it structurally. Adding spending on top of discontent is not solving it. It's, at the contrary, blowing a problem out of proportion.
All right, so we'll take one more question, and hopefully maybe some of us can even stick around afterwards for if you want to kind of come up to us and say hello. But we'll take one from the gentleman over here.
Hello, my name is Dr. Ali Zbib, and I'm the president of the Development Association for Nurturing Arab Leadership and Innovation. Sometimes the name of this organization is like a whole question, so I'm sorry for that. First, I want to congratulate you on this survey, although I do believe that you should have maybe decreased the age, 18 years starting from youth. I know the international classification, but I think Arab youth starts from at least 14 or 15 years. And that's very important if we want to speak later on issues of financial literacy and education to be paralleled by financial education. Another very small comment is I don't really think that knocking doors is something illegal in the Arab world. I mean, I'm a lawyer. I've never heard that. You can knock doors. You can go door to door. You can conduct surveys.
You have to get permission.
Yeah, you need permission, but it's not. Nothing is illegal. Now, on another front, and because His and Her Excellency commented regarding the desire of Arab youth wanting to be employed in the public sector, I'm not very happy to say that the public sectors in the Arab world are not the most straightforward sectors in terms of the levels of corruption in employment, the nepotism and the favoritism involved. And therefore, when an individual, youth or not, is employed, usually the possibility of dismissal is almost impossible. So that's not only stability on the employment level, but he's going to stay there, or her. She's going to stay there, because simply what is required from an employee in the public sector is much less than what is required from the employee on the private sector.
Sorry,
and that's what Dr. Jihad, that's what Dr. Jihad was. I'm just going to finish there. We have to concentrate on financial inclusion, okay? So the problem, you said Arab unity is the ultimate solution. I've spent 8 years researching that. People think it's impossible. It's not. If we start with inclusion, literacy, paralleled with more and more education, that, I think, is what we need to seek in the Arab world. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, I guess we'll wrap it up on that.
Sahar wanted to say something.
Yeah, if you wanted to, really quickly.
No, I honestly I agree with your first point, but I tend to disagree on the job things. I think the private sector is a more competitive world, and it's a more performance-based. That's where you come from. But I think now that I've moved jobs and I operate, that when you guarantee the job, when you feel it's safe, no matter whether you perform or not perform, when you know that your promotion is getting anyway every 5 years or every interval, even if you're on leave, I think that's a challenge, because governments today in the Arab world have a big task to do. They're moving with a very ambitious economic reform program. They have no option. And hence you need skills, you need caliber, you need people who are committed to work full-time as you do in the private sector. Private sector is a very competitive world. If you don't perform, you know that you're not getting a promotion, and you're most likely you'll lose your job. So I think this is where we want to do more performance-based, because our governments need skills, need caliber, need people who are very well equipped to move forward with the reforms, to provide the right social safety nets, to do the filtering in a very prudent and accurate manner. Otherwise, we won't be able to achieve growth in a sustainable and irreversible reforms.
All right. Well, I regret that we have to cut this conversation off right here. It seems like we were all just starting to get warmed up. But I want to thank you all for joining us here today, and enjoy the rest of the meeting. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.